Mark Consuelos said something on live television that sounded like a joke, and was a joke, but it landed the way only true things do. Sitting next to his wife of nearly 30 years, he told her on the air that if their marriage ever ended, there's really only one reason he'd fight to stay in it: their dog. Not passion, not romance, not 30 years of memories. The dog. It got a huge laugh. It also, if you actually sit with it for a second, told you almost everything you need to know about how a marriage survives 3 decades in the public eye. This is the story of that joke, where it came from, why it worked, and what it says about a couple who met on a soap opera set in the 1990s and somehow ended up co-anchoring network television together 30 years later. The exchange happened on the August 11th broadcast of Live with Kelly and Mark, during a pre-taped summer episode. Ripa was reading through a segment about a real piece of proposed legislation in Pennsylvania, a bill that would, for the first time, treat pets more like children in divorce proceedings, with rules for shared custody, visitation-style schedules, and who covers the costs, according to reporting from TV Insider and Fox News. As Ripa read out the specifics, including a clause about judges weighing who actually did the daily work of caring for the pet, she gave her husband a look. The show has one dog. Its name is Lena. And everyone watching at home already knew who the show was implying didn't want that dog in the first place. Consuelos didn't dodge it. He leaned into the bit. According to multiple outlets that covered the segment, including Fox News and E! News, his response was some version of, he would rather stay married without love than risk losing time with Lena. Ripa's comeback was immediate and just as sharp. Something to the effect of, is that all you're asking for, because that can be arranged, and the studio audience predictably lost it. It's a clean, tight bit. Setup, twist, punchline, laugh. On a daytime talk show that runs 5 days a week, it's the kind of segment producers dream about. Low effort, high return, completely of the moment. But bits like that don't work with just any two people. They work because of who's saying them, and what's underneath the joke when you take it apart. Here's the thing about marriage jokes. Timing isn't just a comedy skill, it's a relationship skill. A couple who's been together for 6 months cannot make this joke. If they tried, it wouldn't play as comedy, it would play as a red flag. The audience would flinch. Somebody's mother would text them. A couple who's been together for almost 30 years, who eloped in secret, raised 3 kids together, and have spent the last few years literally sitting beside each other on national television every weekday morning, that couple has banked enough trust that the joke reads as exactly what it is, a joke. That's not a small distinction. It's the entire mechanism. Long-married couples develop a kind of shorthand that outsiders sometimes mistake for tension. They interrupt each other. They needle each other about small, specific things. Who forgets to let the dog out, who can't stop glancing at the camera, who still hasn't learned to load the dishwasher the right way. None of that is evidence of trouble. It's usually the opposite. It's evidence of a couple who no longer needs to perform gentleness for each other, because the underlying safety of the relationship isn't in question. Psychologists who study long-term relationships, including decades of research out of the Gottman Institute on marital stability, have consistently pointed to a similar idea. Couples who can tease each other affectionately, without contempt, tend to be more securely attached, not less. The line between playful teasing and something corrosive is trust. Remove the trust, and the exact same joke becomes cruelty. Keep the trust intact, and it becomes a kind of intimacy that's actually hard to fake on camera. That's the frame worth applying to the Lena joke. It isn't a crack in the marriage. It's a symptom of how solid it's become. To understand why this couple can joke about a loveless marriage without anyone actually worrying about it, it helps to remember how unusual their story has been from the very beginning. Ripa and Consuelos met in the early 1990s on the set of the ABC soap opera All My Children, where she played Haley Vaughn and he played Mateo Santos, 2 characters who were, on-screen, deeply in love. Off-screen, that chemistry apparently didn't stay fictional for long. The two eloped in Las Vegas in May 1996, reportedly without telling most of their family beforehand, and kept the marriage relatively private for a stretch afterward. Ripa has said publicly in interviews over the years that the relationship wasn't some slow-burn courtship. It moved fast, including, by her own account, a breakup in the week before the wedding that somehow didn't stop the wedding from happening. That's not the tidy, camera-ready origin story most celebrity couples put out. It's messier and more human than that, which is arguably why it's held up. Their first child, Michael, arrived in 1997, followed by Lola in 2001 and Joaquin in 2003. In other words, this couple didn't spend a decade building a polished public image before starting a family. Marriage, fame, and parenthood all arrived on top of each other, while Ripa was also becoming one of the most recognizable faces in American daytime television, first through All My Children, then through Live, across several co-hosting eras, most famously alongside Regis Philbin and later Ryan Seacrest. Consuelos, meanwhile, kept working steadily in television and film, including a long run on the CW's Riverdale, while also becoming a familiar public presence simply by being Ripa's husband, a role that, in a lot of celebrity marriages, quietly curdles into resentment. One partner's career becomes the center of gravity, the other either disappears into the shadow of it or competes against it. That's not what happened here. For years, Consuelos stayed close enough to live, to make regular guest appearances, enough to be a known quantity to the audience, without the entire relationship depending on the two of them sharing a desk. Then, in 2023, after Ryan Seacrest departed the show, Consuelos joined full-time as permanent co-host, and the program was rebranded Live with Kelly and Mark. That's a genuinely risky move for any couple, let alone one with 3 decades of history and 3 adult children. Working side by side with your spouse on camera, 5 mornings a week, while also being married to them off camera, is the kind of arrangement that has ended plenty of relationships. It requires a couple to make their marriage part of the product without letting the product consume the marriage. 2 years in, by most accounts, and by the ratings and cultural chatter the show has generated, that arrangement is working. Which brings the story back to Lena. Lena is a real dog, a Maltese and Shih Tzu mix the couple adopted in March 2021, after she appeared during a pet adoption segment on the show, according to Fox News and multiple outlets that covered her origin story. Ripa has said her kids initially wanted to name the new puppy Leia, a Star Wars reference to go with the family's older dog at the time, a Shih Tzu named Chewie, but Lena is what stuck. Chewie died in 2025, at 17 years old, and Ripa's on-air reaction to that loss, she was visibly emotional, telling the audience how much the dog had meant to the family through every stage of raising their kids, is worth mentioning here, because it explains why the Lena bit lands the way it does. This isn't a couple treating a pet as a punchline out of nowhere. It's a couple who has, on camera, already shown the audience how much their dogs have functioned as real, load-bearing members of the household. That context matters for the bigger picture, too, the empty nest. Michael, Lola, and Joaquin are grown now, in their early to late 20s, out of the house, building their own lives. That's a real transition point for any long marriage, and not always an easy one. 4 years, a family with kids at home runs on structure that's mostly external. School schedules, sports, homework, curfews, holidays, the sheer logistical churn of raising 3 children. All of that keeps a household's rhythm going almost automatically. When the kids move out, that external structure disappears, and a couple is left facing each other without it. Family therapists and researchers who study the empty nest transition, including work published through the American Psychological Association, have long noted that this stage can either strengthen a marriage by giving a couple space to rediscover each other, or expose distance that the daily noise of parenting had been quietly covering up. Often it's some mix of both. It's not unusual in that stage for couples to redirect some of that caretaking energy toward a pet. The dog becomes the new small creature in the house who needs feeding, walking, and fussing over. Proof that the household is still, in some small way, a place where someone is being taken care of. None of that is unique to Ripa and Consuelos. It's a fairly well-documented pattern in family psychology. What's unique is that this particular couple gets to work it out loud, in front of a national audience, turning a private adjustment into 5 minutes of daytime comedy. Seen that way, the Loveless Marriage for Lena line isn't really about Lena at all. Lena is the vehicle. The joke is doing something else, It's letting two people who've spent 30 years building a life together acknowledge, in the only language their show speaks, that the shape of their household has changed. The premise of a headline like, "Mark Consuelos finally admits what we all suspected," implies there's some open secret the audience has been waiting to hear confirmed. So what is it, actually? Mostly, it's this, that Kelly Ripa is not a person you passively coexist with. She's fast, she's sharp, and after decades of live daytime hosting, through multiple co-host transitions, public scrutiny, and the daily pressure of filling airtime without a script, she has a command of a room that most people, famous or not, simply don't have. Live hosting looks casual. It isn't. It requires split-second timing, the ability to pivot a story mid-sentence, the instinct to know exactly when a bit has run its course, and the stamina to do all of that fresh, 5 days a week, for years. Ripa has been doing some version of that job since the late 1990s. Consuelos married that person before most of the world understood what she'd become. He didn't marry a daytime television institution, he married a young soap actress he was working alongside. He then spent the following decades watching her turn into one of the most durable and recognizable hosts in American TV. For a lot of husbands, that kind of asymmetry in public profile becomes a source of quiet friction. By most public accounts, including Consuelos's own comments to outlets like Fox News over the years about being crazy about his wife and calling their marriage a source of pride, not competition, that hasn't been the dynamic here. He's talked about their shared family background and their kids as the glue, not as a source of strain. What the Lena joke actually confirms, then, isn't some hidden marital crisis. It's something much less dramatic and honestly more interesting, that Consuelos is comfortable being the secondary comic voice in his own household on national television without it costing him anything. He can be the punchline. He can lose the bit to his wife on purpose. And he still walks away looking entirely secure. That's a specific, learnable skill in a long relationship, knowing when to compete and when to hand the moment to your partner, and it's one a lot of couples, celebrity or not, never quite figure out. Strip away the tabloid framing, and here's what's really going on. A couple married for 3 decades has learned that romance, by itself, was never going to be the thing holding a 30-year marriage together. It helped it start. It doesn't explain why it's lasted. What tends to explain long marriages, according to relationship researchers who've spent careers studying what separates couples who stay together from couples who don't, is closer to infrastructure than intensity. Shared history. Shared responsibilities. Inside jokes nobody else would understand. The specific, granular knowledge of how your partner takes their coffee, what actually upsets them versus what they pretend upsets them, and which arguments are worth having again and which ones you've both silently agreed to let go of. A dog fits into that infrastructure more naturally than people sometimes expect. So does a running bit on a live TV show. So does bringing up on air a slightly unflattering detail about your spouse and trusting they'll hit it right back at you instead of feeling exposed. None of that requires a couple to be uncomplicated or perfectly harmonious. If anything, the appeal of Ripa and Consuelos's public dynamic is that it isn't polished. They interrupt each other. They tease. They occasionally let the audience see something that looks, for a second, like real irritation before it resolves into a laugh. That messiness reads as more believable than a couple who only ever performs affection, because most people who've been married a long time recognize it. Real long-term relationships aren't a highlight reel. They're a mix of loyalty, routine, mild grievance, forgiveness, and the accumulated weight of having built an entire life with one specific person. So when Mark Consuelos jokes that he'd stay in a loveless marriage just to keep seeing the family dog, he isn't confessing that the marriage has gone cold. He's demonstrating in real time exactly how far from cold it actually is, because a marriage that fragile couldn't survive the joke. Divorce doesn't fit neatly into their story, and it's not because their relationship is flawless. It's because after 30 years, a marriage like theirs stops being just a romance and becomes something closer to a shared institution. 3 kids, 1 very famous dog, a television show they built together, and a few decades of memories that would be nearly impossible to divide the way a court divides property. Mark Consuelos didn't reveal a secret crisis on live television. He revealed, almost by accident, what a marriage actually looks like once it survived long enough to stop needing to prove anything. Humor. Routine. A little bit of teasing that would sound alarming from anyone else. And apparently, one very well-loved dog named Lena. What do you think actually keeps a 30-year marriage like theirs together? Is it the humor, the history, or something else entirely? Let me know what you think in the comments.